Welcome to Becoming Parents podcast. I'm your host, Jen Taylor Campbell. I'm a birth and bereavement doula, as well as an adoption and surrogacy doula. Doula means woman who serves. And although I love happy births, adoptions, and surrogacy, the pro bono part of my business is in bereavement. I'm here to help you. I'm also mom of 18, yes, 18 children, with over 30 years experience in the trenches as a mom myself. We have a huge blended family, and I've also experienced the loss of our adult son. Remember, give a shout out to those brave enough to share their stories on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents podcast. Today I have Steve Friedman on with me. Steve, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Jennifer.
First of all, I love that I have you. You're my new favorite. I already told you that because every time I do a podcast, I'm like, here's my favorite. But I am really, really genuinely excited. I always love having men on because it's harder to get them on to talk. And also, this is going to be a really incredible topic that's going to touch people, I think, and something that we need more of. So I want you to jump in on your story of becoming parents.
Sure. So my wife and I, her name is Jennifer as well. My
A
wife and I
nice
have
name.
three kids, and so we are. And today we're happy empty nesters. But the story started many, many years ago. I would say it started probably 28 years ago. So our first
Mm.
child is Gwendolyn, and she was born 28 years ago, and it changed our lives. Now, everybody would probably say that about their first child, and um, we can talk as much as we want, but it's hard to be prepared for that first child. But our first child, Gwendolyn, was born with Down syndrome. We did not know that in advance, and it changed the rest of our lives, as every one of our kids have done that for us and for others as well. But it changed our trajectory, and it made us really pause and think about what was life going to be like for our daughter, our new daughter, and what was life going to be like for our family that we was still growing. And so we really spent a lot of time thinking about that. If I fast forward to when she was about 18, so she had finished high school. She has done really well. She started to go to a post high school program for adults with Down syndrome, and it was a fantastic program. She learned a lot, um, built her independence and her social skills. And she came home one day and she said, "Mom and Dad, I want to be independent." So I think that's a pretty big statement for any family, but certainly for our daughter, we had not heard that kind of statement before, and so we sat down and we said, "Well, what does that mean to you?" And lo and behold, we got a big butcher block piece of paper out. We put it on the kitchen counter, and we started just mind mapping. What does independence mean to her? And it was, I want to keep learning. I want to go to school. I want to work. I want to have relationships. I want to be included. I want to move out of the house. And so she had all these aspirations, and she was about 18 at the time. And so we sat down and we said, well, we asked questions like why and why is this important, and what do you think you need to do to be able to do these things, to be independent? What skills do you need to learn? What do you already know? What help do you need? And that sort of stuff. So we broke a lot of those items on her mind mapping sheet down until we had identified all these different things that she wanted to do and needed to learn to get there. And so it was quite a journey. And over the years ahead, she learned to. She'd already been staying at home, but she learned how to do that on an extended basis and take care of her security and be aware of her surroundings. She went to this school and she learned a lot, not just academically, but socially and vocationally. She learned how to do her own clothes laundry. And so, step by step, she figured those sort of things out and became more independent as we went forward. And so, right before COVID in 2020, we started talking about the next step. So, we really believe
Okay.
in helping her to learn and grow, but we wanted to make sure that she had the opportunities to do that and not to plateau or be stagnant. And that next step was housing for her. And
Okay.
so that was the next thing that we really worked on.
When she was born, did you know ahead of the birth that she was going to have Down syndrome, or was that a surprise at birth?
We had no idea. There are many tests, but the tests that we had done came back negative or inconclusive. So we had
Okay.
no idea. And my wife was, young at the time, and so that was not really expected. As soon as
Right.
Gwendolyn was born, and the doctor put her on my wife's lap, then my wife looked at her and said she has Down syndrome. And the doctors and nurses were like,
Wow.
no, too early to tell. But she knew. I think it was a mother's intuition. And then we went from there.
I have a daughter who's 27 now, and she was born at home with midwives. And the midwives came back 24 hours later and said, we're driving you to a blood test. She has 2 out of 3 signs. She has bilateral simian creases in her
Hmm.
hands, and she had the tongue thrust. I don't even remember what the third sign was. And we went and had a blood test at 24 hours old, and it was negative, and she doesn't have Down syndrome. But also, like, there was no indication, no reason. I was young, and
Hmm.
she still has bilateral simian creases, but I, so when those things, when you have a baby and you hear that, it can be devastating. It's so interesting to me that your wife was the one that said, "This is what's happening," and the doctor was like,
Hmm.
"No, no, no, no," and she
Hmm.
was correct. And and then what? Because we have to think, like, 28 years ago, the
Hmm.
internet wasn't the same, things weren't the same. I How has stigma around Down syndrome changed in the 28 years that you have, I mean, that's been part of your life?
Yeah, it really has changed a lot, and I
I
think
would
it's
think so, yeah.
in so many different ways. So she was born in 1994.
Mhm.
Not that many years before she was born, in the mid 80s, the average lifespan for people with Down syndrome was 25 years. 25 years.
Okay, okay.
And not long before that, it was in the teens. So
Right.
nowadays, people with Down syndrome are oftentimes living well into their 60s and some beyond that. So that has changed a lot. It's
Yeah.
changed a lot as far as the opportunities to be inclusive, to live on their own, to have jobs and all that sort of stuff. But it's also changed things that we've had to recognize about finances, right? So if they're going to live twice as long, how do
Oh,
they afford to do that? And how, as a family, do we afford to do that? If they're going to live twice as long and into their 60s, then you introduce health issues that were never a problem when they only lived into their 20s or early 30s. But Alzheimer's is it's over 90% prevalent by the time you're 60 in people with Down syndrome.
oh,
And
wow.
so that was never an issue beforehand and
Right.
never something we really thought about when she was born. And like most parents, we thought about the here and now. What do we do today, and how's this changed everything? And eventually, we went through, I think, a grieving process that many parents have recognized. But then we also started to recognize that there are many opportunities. And this was back in the 90s, but we really felt like
Right.
there were opportunities for her to grow and really have a great life. We didn't know exactly what that was, but we wanted to make the opportunities available to her. And I think over the last 28 years, those opportunities have just increased as the
Yes.
community has grown and the support and inclusion of people with Down syndrome and other special needs has grown in society.
I have a son who's 24 and he has autism. And so same sort of thing. I mean, when he was born, when he was about 2, we knew something was not right, but we had no idea, no way to figure out. We weren't talking about autism that much back then. So
Hmm.
I understand that completely. I didn't know about the life. I didn't know about a lot of that information that you shared. And that when they live longer, that has other issues. Is it something where she receives disability through Social Security?
She does, yes. So at
Okay.
18, she started to get SSI
Okay.
and some other benefits, and that's
Right.
certainly helped. Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. What was it like? How far apart were your other kids? Were you ever concerned about having another child? 'Cause you have 3, and how far apart? And what was that like growing up in this family?
Well, when we were in the hospital, that's a challenge for a lot of families back then and even today, that a lot of the staff in the hospital aren't really prepared for this sort of event. They don't know what to tell the parents. Sometimes it's really very concerning what they share with the parents as far as what they think the life might be like or what they think the parents should do. I mean, the days of institutionalizing people with Down syndrome and other special needs is largely in our rear view mirror, but some people in hospitals really don't understand that even yet today. But one of the pieces of advice we got shortly thereafter from one of the doctors was if you're thinking about having other kids, you might want to think about having them sooner than later because it provides that in house role model for our daughter, Gwendolyn.
Oh,
And I think that was really good advice. It took us a while to have Gwendolyn, but our second daughter, Madeline, was born 13 months later. And
okay.
so we were, naturally concerned that perhaps she would have Down syndrome as well. But at that point, we had recognized that, you know, our first daughter, Gwendolyn, has Down syndrome, but she's our daughter, and so we loved her like anybody would love their kids, and started to recognize the great opportunities and the way that she's positively changed our life. Madeline does not have Down syndrome, but they really grew up very close. And so I think that was really good advice that we got because they role modeled. They oftentimes did a lot of things about the same time. They walked and they talked about the same time. They potty trained
Okay.
together. So it was almost like having twins.
Wow. That's actually really incredible. And that's great that you got that advice and that you followed that advice. And
Mhm.
so she was only developmentally maybe a year behind.
Right. That's right.
That's great. I mean, that's
I mean,
fantastic.
over time that stretches out, right?
Correct.
So when
Yes.
when her sister is
Mhm.
13, Gwendolyn is still is more years behind on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But it was always great to have that role model, and I think they went to the same school a lot of the time, albeit in different classes, but they saw each other and supported each other, and I think that also made a difference, really for both of the kids.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I know what it was like with our family having one son who was autistic and kids close together. Um, and was school challenging for her or was it a happy place for her? I know she said she wanted to keep learning. My son did also, but
Mhm.
school until college wasn't a happy place for him. College is a very happy place for him. But yeah,
Yeah, I think that I think school for excuse me, for Gwendolyn was a happy place in general, but frustrating for her and frustrating for us. And many parents have gone
yeah.
through this. You may have gone through this as well. The challenges with the school boards and administrators and some teachers. So she had the good fortune of having many great teachers in her experience, but there were also others that were quite a challenge. And they just for Gwendolyn and I think for many kids, a lot of it is just the chemistry. And so there were some teachers that she had great chemistry with because she could tell that they kind of got her, which is quite an amazing intuitive sort of sense for anybody at an early age. And there was also that intuition that some people just didn't get her. They weren't comfortable to talk to her, to help her out and to teach her, and that those kind of relationships were always a bit challenging. But it was this give and take throughout her education of how much more do we push to try and give her more opportunities and how
Mhm.
much more do we support an environment that may not be as inclusive as others, but is providing her with the specialties that she needs, the teachers that are familiar with how to teach them and to grow them. And so it was a bit of a balancing act throughout her 18 years. And one of the reasons why we went to the post high school program that I mentioned earlier, because it was all about how do we get each of the individual students or adults with Down syndrome to grow in their own specific way, and that customized care really made a difference.
I totally, I can completely see that because we did the same sort of. I'm excited to talk about the independent living. We did the same sort of setup with my son. Was it hard for her seeing her siblings do things that and having those conversations about like driving that you won't be,
Mm,
it's this is not something because those were when I think when when our son was growing up, and I know it's different, there were things that he was never going to be able to do that
mhm,
they were all going to do. And socially staying around 7 or 8 in some things and 10 in other things,
mhm.
and watching them kind of bypass. How challenging was that for Gwendolyn?
Challenging in different ways, but I mean, most of the things that her sister, and her brother is about 7 years younger, so much younger. So she saw him and took care of him as a baby, but also eventually he too passed her up as far as academics
Yeah.
and things like that. So she saw that from both of her siblings as well as other friends and relatives, and so you could kind of see sometimes a glimmer in her eye of I wish I could do that. But for the most part, we've encouraged her to be able to do everything that her brother and sister
Yep.
can do. It may take longer, but their runway of learning is quite significant. And we always felt like, she could get a job. She could have relationships. She could certainly have friendships as well. She could move out of the house. We always talk to her about what you can do. There
Right.
are, as you mentioned, a couple of things that we never felt like she would ever be able to do, such as having children and
Yeah.
driving. All those
Right.
there are some people with Down syndrome that do drive, but generally, those are probably the two main things that we felt we weren't going to just talk around those. We had conversations with her about these are just a couple things you're not going to be able to do. There's lots of other things that you can do, and we celebrated those. But the ones that she was not going to do, we kind of took those off the table so that she wasn't always focused on any of those, and so that helped her to really focus on
Okay.
what she could do.
It's just it is a balancing act having these conversations, and I
Mm,
think, 3 kids, all of them are different.
mhm,
All the kids, and so you talk to them differently. The consequences for poor choices is a little bit different. Like, my goal was the same with the kids, but the way we walked through it wasn't the same. What was it like
mhm.
for you when she came to you? Did you ever think independence was a possibility prior to that conversation when she was 18? Because that's a really big conversation.
Yeah, that's a great question because I really don't think that we were thinking, certainly when she was born in her early days, that she was going to be able to do all these things. I mean, and like many parents, we were just focused on how could we manage a growing household with all these little kids running around.
Right.
And so we really didn't spend as much time thinking about independence. I think before she came home and wanted to talk about it, we recognized there was a bit of a change. So she would go to social events, and for years, we would go in there with her and we'd stay with her, or we'd stay in the back of the room while she had a dance or they did arts and crafts or whatever the case may be. And eventually, probably when she was about 15 or so, she started telling me, "You don't need to come in. Just drop
Oh,
me off and pick me up in an hour or two." And we realized, well, that's an interesting twist, which we were happy to support. But
right.
so I think that was kind of her early signs of breaking out of her shell. She really grew up as as a shy person, which I mean, there's shy people in every family, perhaps, and some of that may have been because of the challenges she had at school and just socially as a person with special needs. But she was starting to break out of her shell, and I think she started to see, as her brother and sister were starting to do other things, that she too could do these things. She wanted to do these things, and so yeah, things started to change. But it really started to open our eyes as to, oh, this is different than the vision we had in our head of what life might be like for her after
Yeah.
18 or so, and what life might be like for us as she grows up and becomes more independent.
As a parent with somebody with special needs, I went through an independence program. It's
Mm,
kind of similar to foster care.
okay.
Now my son's in an apartment where somebody checks on him a couple times a week, but he had to like ease into that, right? And
Hmm.
has to get checked on a lot. But at first, he lived in someone's house who was a caretaker who was trained. And I just remember thinking, I want him to have every opportunity possible that his siblings had. And I know that that's the same thing that you've expressed. So, what does that look like? It's not going to be exactly the same. They're not going to get married, go to college, get married, buy a house, have kids. It doesn't look like that. So, what does it look like? And I love that she came to you guys and that you mind mapped it. And
Yeah.
there was one thing that you said that you mind mapped that I wanted to ask you about, and now it's escaping me. But when you were mind mapping everything,
Hmm.
having friends is something that over and over has been a thing. And when did she know that learning? Because, and that's why I asked you about the high school environment. It's not always as supportive as it could be. But
Mhm.
then some of the programs are incredibly supportive. When did that make a shift to for her, and how did you guys go through the process? And I know I want to jump in and talk about your website and your book because
Mhm.
these kind of all go hand in hand.
Sure. So I think um, high school had its pros and cons, but I think
Mhm.
when she moved into this after high school program, that was more customized to what she did. And they weren't necessarily sitting down and learning American history,
Yeah,
but they were sitting down and understanding the events of the day, right? So they would talk about that. So that gave them some conversation and some understanding of the world is bigger. They
right.
talked about vocational, they talked about hygiene, they talked about independence, like how do you operate in society in the community? How do you get a job? Those sort of things. And I think she really loved that. And she would come home and talk about all these things that she's learned. And you could kind of see not only has she learned, but that enabled her to do certain things that she had not done before. And the beaming face that she has when she does stuff that she has never done before, whether it's having a job or walking to work by herself or doing certain things at school, is just it's golden.
Is golden. Walking to work by herself. I love that.
Yeah.
It's and I think also as a parent of a child with special needs, um I it's easy for us to kind of get in a box too and keep
Hmm.
doing things the way we've only always done them because they work and it's safe and we're checking the box or whatever. And
Hmm.
not even for me, it was like, oh, that's something you want to do. That's possible for you to do. So let's figure it out. It wasn't even a matter of wanting to hold her back. It's
Hmm.
more a matter of not realizing that that's a priority for her.
You're right, and I think when she came home and wanted to talk about independence, it kind of shook us a little bit as well to say, maybe we've underestimated the
Yeah.
opportunities that she has, because these are very adult, mature sort of statements and interests and desires, and so she kind of, in our minds, took a bit of a leap in maturity at that point, and it
Yeah.
also made us think about what else might we have been able to do. We all think about our regrets and things like that. She's done a great job, and I think it really made us think a lot about it, and a lot of her path is what sparked us to write this book, The Essential Guide for Families with Down Syndrome, because we felt like
That
we
book.
had learned a lot along the way, right? We had learned not just about how she can grow her independence and the skills she needs to grow, but about all the resources that are out there, whether it's financial resources, legal resources. We learned a lot about health challenges for adults, kind of these relatively new health challenges, the
Right.
housing, and all these different things. And we just felt like these were pieces of information that other families needed to know. Many families these days talk about transitions or independence, and usually it starts out in groups that are roughly 18 to 25, and so they're interested in, well, what do I do now, because these handrails of public school have gone away, and for the most part oftentimes these young adults end up going home and they
Yeah.
regress on some of the things they've learned and all this other stuff. So families are concerned about that, and one of the first things I tell these folks is, and especially younger families, independence doesn't start at 18 to 25. Independence starts really at one. I think we did a really good job, but I think there's certainly things we could have done to help promote that independence even more, and to recognize that the long term was going to be really positive. And I think that putting our kids first, they call it person centered planning, but really putting our kids first and what's best for them, not necessarily for us as parents
Yep.
or the expectations that we have of our kids, but what does she want? What are her desires? And so when she came in home and talked about that, it really shook us a little bit and said, she is the captain of her independence team. She is the one that guides us, and we will provide support and challenge, but we want to follow her lead on where she can go.
What was that? I have a granddaughter that started kindergarten yesterday,
Yeah.
and that's that whole the my granddaughter's ecstatic, bye, 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 doesn't want to stay, and mom's crying. And there's a huge part of that when our kids leave the house as well.
Mhm.
We want them to, we're excited for them to, we're excited that they're excited, we're a little afraid for them, we're hopeful. I mean, all those same feelings that you have when your kids start kindergarten and
Mhm.
are when they move out. But it's a little bit more bittersweet, or there's something different about it when it was my son who had
Mm.
disabilities, and I wasn't sure for years and years, what would he be able to? What would that look like? Could we find a program?
Mhm.
Would he be happy? And you're scared. You don't want them on
Mhm.
your couch at 40 playing video games, having no life and regressing. You don't want that.
That's true.
But you don't know where they're gonna fall in that spectrum of independence. How hard was it for you, and how ecstatic was she when she got that independence?
Uh, you know, I think about the vision I have in my head right now is when she walked to work for the first time. So one of
Okay.
her jobs, her second job was a couple blocks away at she worked at a subway station, Subway Foods,
Yep.
helping to make and prep the foods and clean and all this. And so she was very proud, always very proud of the work that she's doing. And so I had walked her to school. And then one day she was like, I want to walk home by myself. So we practiced a few more days. You're crossing a street, there's cars,
Yeah.
there's whatever. And then when I walked her one day, she said, "Well, today's the day. I want to walk by myself. I want to walk home by myself." So I waited across the main intersection after she got off work, and she's walking across about a block away, and I can see her, and she's doing great. And she gets to the intersection, and I'm across the street, and she looks at me, and she's just beaming because she knows she's doing it. And she looks both ways for cars, and she walks across the street. About halfway across, she just starts running into my arms, and she was just so proud of what she was able to do. And it really reiterated we're on the right path, and there's so many other great moments like that ahead for her. And so we really wanted to support. But like you said, it's not necessarily easy, and the
Yeah.
housing is the biggest, toughest part of it. What I've found is most families don't really want to talk about the housing. I think they, like we did many years ago, assume that our responsibility as parents, especially if somebody with special needs, is that she's going to probably live with us the rest of her life. We are
Yeah.
her guardians, we're her caretakers, and that's just a role we play. And so even though she was the one that instigated it, when we start to talk about moving out, there was a bit of shame, and many families feel that way. But we recognized one that this was what she wanted. So from a person centered perspective, this was helping her. Two, we realized that, like with all her siblings, they're going to grow and meet their greatest potential by getting out from under the safety of our
Yeah.
umbrella, and that most of the apprehension probably resided with my wife and myself, not with Gwendolyn. She was excited. And so we looked around pre-COVID at about 15, 20 places that were housing opportunities in the area that we lived in the city we lived in, and in some surrounding cities, until we found the right fit. So independence is different for everybody, and
Yep.
housing is different for everybody. So you have to really do a lot of homework. But that really hit on the last reason why we kind of jumped on board with this, is that we wanted to be part of the process, and we wanted it to be as long as the process needed to be, to find the right place for her that she was happy with, that we were comfortable with, that provided her with what she needed, and also the growth that she wants to continue. And if that took us years and years, then so be it. But we wanted to be part of that. We didn't want to be in a situation where one day we're just not able to take care of her, or we have an accident and one of us isn't around, or
Right.
all these kind of scenarios, and then suddenly we're not even part of the process. Who is part of the process? Could be the state, could be siblings that are not here locally or aren't really sure exactly what to do. And so we wanted to do that while we could still be part of that process. But I will say that when the day that we left her at her new place, my wife and I sat in the car and we weeped a little bit about are we sure we've done the right thing? Because this is a major step for any family. But she's been there for almost 2 years now and just loves it, learning a lot, making friends, working. She's about 18 minutes away, so we see her every week or two, and it's been a great experience. But it really requires the parents to let go a little bit and provide a
Yeah.
little bit of trust into that they can do it. They usually do surprise us, and this was another situation where she had it well in hand.
I mean, it's hard no matter what. It's hard, but
Mm,
it is a different kind of hard, right? To
right.
And you're kind of trusting the system. There is a lot more to set up and a lot more to figure out. You're right.
Mm,
I'm glad that you brought up the part about, like, if something happened to you or your wife, what then? Who would take over? Um, that
yeah.
those are things. So you address all this in your book. You have this amazing website that
Thank you.
I've been cyber stalking you this morning. Um, Beyond Down syndrome, everything, all the links are in the description, but it's a really, really great website. And you have the book, you can order a signed copy.
Mhm,
And you're offering this. This completely changed your life, writing this book, having this
mm,
experience. What is next for you? Is there something next? Are there more books that you're thinking about writing? The speaking engagements can happen forever.
mhm,
The
mhm.
blog can happen forever. But what's next for you guys? What was it like? What's your life like now, 2 years later, after she's moved out and not having to do as much surrounding? It was a really hard transition for me when my son moved out and I didn't need to do all of that all the time.
Yeah, I would say, even though she's our oldest, she was the last one to move out of the house.
Yeah.
And so so we instantly moved from one city to another, because this is where the right program was. We became empty nesters, and so our life was changing in many different ways.
Yeah.
It took a lot of adjustment, as it normally would, but it's really fantastic, and it's great to see that she's taken advantage of the opportunity and learning and growing, and empty nesting, nobody can should complain about being an empty nester as well. And we travel a lot to go see, her brother and sister live out of town, and we see her frequently, and sometimes she stays over with us. But we also, and I think a lot of parents of people with special needs don't really, they kind of write off their retirement years, even years earlier, and they assume, well, that's really not going to be the retirement I thought I might have before I had kids. But
Right.
we realize that those dreams and aspirations that we had for retirement are still there, and so we've tried to kind of balance that between making sure she's got the right surroundings and experience, and also recognizing that we have opportunities to do things that we kind of had written off as well. It's really the housing issue, even though many families are apprehensive about it, or they assume that their siblings are just going to take care of them, which um, is
Yeah.
something you should really discuss as a family before you make any assumptions. We had conversations with our kids who love their sister dearly, and we said, listen, one day you're going to be her guardian. We're her guardian now. One day you'll be her guardian, but you will not be her caregiver, right? You
Mm,
have a life. I want your sister to be part of your life, but I don't expect that she's going to live with you, or that you have to provide her with the uh, insights and catalysts every day for her growth. That's something else, and that's one of the reasons why we chose a great residential living community that Gwendolyn is in, is because that's not what we felt was right for our family. It may be right for other families, but this is the first generation, especially in the Down syndrome community. This is the first generation where people are outliving their parents. So when they were only living into their 20s or 30s,
yeah.
generally, if the family chose for them to stay at home, they probably could stay at home. May not be the best thing for them, but they could. Nowadays, I expect that Gwendolyn's going to outlive us. So, and that's the case for most families. So you really have to think about those things. And I think it's not one of those things you can just flip a switch when they're 25 or 35 or 45, and suddenly you're not able to take care of them. It's something that I think, even from the earliest days, to have a mindset of this is where we're headed. One day she's going to live on her own. to
Yep.
build those skill sets so that she's ready and the parents are ready as soon as they can. So that's really been an important journey for us. And so after writing the book, which came out in February of this year, we've been busy doing a lot of road trips, which is fantastic. We go visit Down syndrome conventions. We go visit a lot of Down syndrome associations and other organizations around the country. And my wife and Gwendolyn come with me, and we talk about our experiences. And we have an independence workshop and talk about what are the aspirations of the people in the room, what are the roadblocks, and how can we help to tackle those roadblocks so you can have the independence that works for you and your family. So that's been a really great silver lining, I think, to writing the book, is that we all get to have great time together. I can watch from the sidelines as Gwendolyn is reading her story that she wrote and edited herself, and she's sharing it with the families, and to see some of the light bulbs go off in the audience as they realize that maybe they've missed some perspectives, or they've just found some resources that they hadn't found before. So that's what we're up to this year and next year for sure.
I love it. I love it. Steve, thank you so much for sharing your story and for coming on. And I'm really hopeful that people in the community that need those resources will reach out to
Mm.
you. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.